I'm Linda Ellerby. It's going to be hard for you to avoid the media noise surrounding the 10th anniversary of the September 11th attacks, which means you may get a lot of information that's wrong. For this reason, Nick News has put together a program for today's kids, explaining just what did happen 10 years ago, what we know, and what we don't know.
This is Nick News with Linda Ellerby. What happened? The story of September 11th, 2001.
Most of you don't remember September 11th, 2001. What you know comes from what you've read, seen on TV, or been told, which explains why so many kids tell us what they really have are questions. Okay, start here. It was a beautiful Tuesday morning on the East Coast of the United States. The sun was shining. All things considered, America seemed fairly peaceful. This was about to change. In fact, it had already begun. Here is what happened on September 11th, 2001.
19 men, terrorists working in small groups, had boarded commercial airline flights in Boston, Newark, which is just outside New York, and at Dulles Airport, just outside Washington, D.C. Shortly after takeoff, the terrorists hijacked, that is, they took control of, 4 commercial airplanes and began to fly those jets themselves. At 8:46 that morning, terrorists flew the first of the 4 hijacked planes, American Airlines Flight 11, into the North Tower of the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center in New York City.
I had just gotten into my classroom and a girl was looking out the window and started screaming, "A plane just hit the Twin Towers." My name is Lila. I was 10 years old on September 11th, and my school, PS 234, was 5 blocks away from the World Trade Center. My teacher quickly shut the blinds.
In the beginning, I thought it was an accident. My name is Lucas. I was 10 years old on September 11th, and I grew up about a mile away from the World Trade Center. I was homesick that day, and right outside my window, I had a perfect view of the towers. I couldn't hear the crash, but I did hear a bunch of police sirens because they were coming from all parts of the city.
What Lucas was hearing was the first of nearly 3,000 emergency personnel, many of whom were off duty that day, making their way to the World Trade Center as fast as possible.
I remember firefighters and policemen, emergency workers in general, trying to get to the site to try to save those who they could. My name is McGee, and I live 5 blocks from the World Trade Center, and I was 11 on September 11th.
The order went out to evacuate everybody from the South Tower of the World Trade Center, and thousands of people were able to get safely out of that building before terrorists crashed the second plane, United Airlines Flight 175, into it. The president was visiting a second-grade class in Florida. The White House Chief of Staff whispered to him that a plane had hit the second tower.
The president, he just sat there and his face just went dead. He had like a blank stare and nobody knew what was going on, so we just went on with the lesson. My name is Jamie. I was 7 years old on September 11th, and I was in the classroom when George Bush got the news of the attack. You can basically tell like that something happened from his facial expression. It was like he was completely out of the room.
While firemen, police officers, and other emergency first responders were still climbing up into the burning buildings, getting even more people out safely, the terrorists crashed the third hijacked plane, American Airlines Flight 77, into the Pentagon, the headquarters of the United States military, which is just outside Washington, D.C. And then there was the fourth plane. On board United Airlines Flight 93, a flight attendant using an airline phone had called her headquarters to say that the plane had been hijacked. Other passengers also made calls and found out what had already happened that morning.
My name is Sarah. I was 14 years old on September 11th when my sister was a passenger on Flight 93. She called my mother and said, "Mom, our plane has been hijacked and I wanted to call and say goodbye."
The terrorist turned the jet. Flight 93 was now heading in the direction of the nation's capital, Washington, D.C. But the passengers, knowing what had happened to the other planes, revolted.
Faced with an extraordinary circumstance, these passengers and crew banded together and decided that they weren't going to let that plane reach its intended target.
And it did not. United Airlines Flight 93 crashed into an empty field in Pennsylvania.
There was a struggle for control of the plane. And ultimately, although the lives of the 40 passengers and crew were lost, no other building and no other life on the ground was lost.
Back in New York, the South Tower of the World Trade Center, after burning for 56 minutes, collapsed in 10 seconds.
I remember there was like one piece of metal just like that loomed there and just like slowly bent down to the side to its collapse. It didn't seem like it was real to me, something that would never happen in real life.
20 minutes later, the North Tower collapsed. At this point, more than 1 million people, workers, residents, and tourists, were ordered to evacuate a huge area around the site of the World Trade Center. Sure, people were scared, but they did not trample other people. Again and again, you saw strangers helping one another so that everyone could get to safety and eventually home.
What I remember most was that this fireman carried me for about half a block right as the first tower collapsed. And I mean, I'll never forget his face or what he looked like.
My father was one of the first responders who evacuated people out of the area around Ground Zero. My name is Alexis. I was 7 on September 11, 2001, and my father was a paramedic for the New York City Fire Department.
Throughout that afternoon and into the night, firemen, cops, construction workers, and other volunteers searched the World Trade Center site and the Pentagon rubble for survivors. That search would go on 24 hours a day for several days.
That evening, my dad came home from work and he was covered in dust and soot from the debris. And it was then that I realized that whatever had happened that day was really important.
Although nearly 3,000 people died in the World Trade Center, 50,000 worked there. More than 100 died in the Pentagon, but 23,000 people worked there. Hundreds of firefighters, police officers, and other rescue workers died, but thousands did not. And while more than 250 people died on the 4 hijacked planes, there were many thousands of planes flying that morning that were not hijacked. So as you can see, the story of what did happen on that day is not the whole story, nor does it include what happened next.